Randy Guitar. I was a city kid in Grand Rapids, Michigan until about the age of 9. But my family went camping every summer. We loaded up the big Pontiac station wagon, the pop-up camper, and we headed up north to a lake called Strawberry Lake near Everett, Michigan. There, I learned how to fish, I learned how to swim, explore, learned to love the outdoors and nature at a young age. I was hunting with my dad, my uncles, learned how to track animals and blood trails. We spent a lot of time up at Strawberry Lake over those summers, but then, in October of 1976, we sold our house in the city, and we moved to the country, between two small villages of Caledonia and Alto, Michigan. About 30 miles roughly out of Grand Rapids near Alto. It was country back then, nothing but farmland and woods. We moved to an old farmhouse on 4.5 acres. This is the current picture. This is what the house looked like then. We had 4 barns then, only 2 stand today. The big milking barn sat at the blue highlighted area near the road. Behind the barns was a creek. That drive wasn't there either. Nowhere any of the houses, just farms, and 3/4 of a mile south were our nearest neighbors. Nothing but farmland and woods back then surrounding us in every direction. That fall and winter I got into late night reruns of Kolchak, the Night Stalker. It was my favorite TV show. But my parents told me monsters weren't real. I was about to find out how wrong they were and how much my life was about to become much like that TV show. That next summer of 1977, in late August, I had a new friend come over, Mike K. We went to play in the barns building hay forts, and at times we kept on seeing what looked like us as a big dog. We saw it inside the barns, outside by the creek and the pond, always running for cover. We told my dad, and he said that he had seen it also while he was walking the dogs at dusk. He suggested we ride our bikes to the state land about 2 miles south of us. He said we can explore there without worrying about these recent big stray dog sightings. So that afternoon, Mike and I rode our bikes to the woods, to what seemed to be 2 miles all uphill. We got there and we hid the bikes in the woods and we started hiking on the logging roads that over time became trails. Deep in the woods we found acres of brush, one that had looked like a small entrance. We decided to look inside. What we saw was what looked like to us as a bum's home. Old tattered blankets, trinkets, Christmas ornaments, tinsel, old bottles, shiny things, magazines, pictures that came with frames stuck on the wall of the bush. We came out of the brush to another trail that we followed deeper into the woods until it came to a small pond, where we found 2 other boys building a camp. An older boy named Russ and a boy our age, also named Mike. We talked and we told them about a bum that might be living out there, and we told them about the brush we found and what was inside of it about a mile away. We fished, we explored some more, and we helped them gather rocks for their fire pit. In the huge tree nearby, they started building a tree fort. They'd already put up most of the steps and asked us for help putting up the last step, far up the tree. It took teamwork to do it. Russ held one of my feet, the 2 Mikes held up each other and gave me the hammer. I put up the last board. After that, Mike K and I were invited to camp with our new friends, so we set out to get our gear. But first we had to walk back to our bikes, almost a mile across the woods, and then nearly almost 3 miles back home, and then back to the woods again. When we got back, we had to get permission, and we also had to wait for Mike's mom to bring him a change of clothes. By that time, the sun was setting, and we had to ride all the way back, all the way uphill, back to the woods, 2 miles again. When we got back to the woods, it was nearly dark. We had trouble finding the right trail back to our friends. We tried several trails, and then we decided to stay the night in some pines that we found a good spot to set up the tent. We shined our lights around and thought we saw something or someone. We thought it was the other boys. We thought they found us and wanted to sneak up on us and scare us. Then we heard sounds like we'd never heard before. Roars, whoops, more like screams, and Russ yelling for Mike, and we didn't know which Mike he was yelling for. And then there were more loud sounds near our tent. Mike K and I then decided to go. We left the tent, we left the gear, everything but our flashlight. We found our bikes in almost a run, and then we rode home in the darkness as fast as we could. When we finally reached my house, my parents were still awake. My dad thought it was funny that we came back so soon and chickened out. We soon went to bed thinking it was still just a joke that the other boys played on us. Well, the next morning, we had to go get our tent, we had to go get our gear. We hopped on our bikes and rode that 2 miles all the way up the hill, back to the woods. We're going to find our new friends and we're going to tell them what a great joke they pulled on us last night. But when we got there, the road was closed off. There were local, state police, people on horseback, people with guns, people with dogs, search crews, and an ambulance had just arrived. We saw a local news station, WZZM News 13 from Grand Rapids, and they were talking to Russ. Mike and I went around the back. Mike and I went around behind Russ to get in the shot of the news camera and listen to Russ what he told the reporter. Russ told the reporter that his friend Mike was taken by some hairy bum that lives in the woods while they were camping last night. His friend is still missing. There were search teams with bullhorns calling out for Mike over and over. After Russ was done talking to the news crew, we got to talk to him and he told us his version of what happened. We told him that we showed up that night, that we couldn't find them, that we decided to camp in some pines and try to find them in the morning, and that we really thought they were playing a joke on us. But obviously it was no joke. Later, Mike and I tried to go recover our tent gear, but we were stopped by a cop, and he radioed for somebody to come talk to us. The man that showed up to talk to us was a Native American. He called himself John Redcorn. He had a lot of questions about what we saw and what we heard while we were camping in the woods that night, and we answered his questions the best we could as we told him what happened. Then he told us what we already knew, that the other Mike was missing and they're having a search party, and that we couldn't go in the woods, but he said he'd take us home, that he'd find our gear and bring it back later, and that's exactly what he did. He brought us home, he talked to my parents, and when he left he said he'd be back in a couple hours with our tent and our gear. Later in the evening, John Redcorn returned with our tent and gear. He told us that our friend Mike has been found, but he was without his clothes and traumatized, was in the hospital. But he was physically okay. He told us we could probably see our friend in a couple of days, and then not to return to the woods. They were still looking for a suspect with a name that was on the magazines in the bush that we had found. He then left, but that wasn't the last we're going to see of John Redcorn. Now part 2. And then in August 1977, last couple weeks just before Labor Day, things really started getting crazy. More than the week before. Basically what this document goes over is the PBB poisoning that started in 1973 wasn't discovered until 1974. Burial sites weren't started until 1976. The cleanup took years, all the way until 1981. The poison was fire retardant. Thousands of cattle died and millions of people were affected. I'll leave a link to another video that explains more details into this. The local farmer's dump spot for the dead PBB poisoned cattle was here, right by the creek. Shortly before my dad died, he told me of an incident before the barn encounters where he had walk their dogs every evening. He'd go down to the creek, and that was the area where they had dumped the cows. The farmers had dumped the poison PBB, poison cows down there. And what he came across at dusk was, at first he saw the red eye shine, and then he saw, with his little dull, 70s flashlight back then, he saw what was eating the cows, and he actually kept that to himself. He didn't tell me about this until, 2014 or 2015, just before he passed away, and when he finally told me about all the things that happened. This was one of the incidents that he saw. He just thought they would go away, and he didn't foresee all the things that were going to happen down at the barn and everything else. Well, about 1.5 miles to the south, there was a few neighbors and a bunch of kids my age that I played with that summer. One boy, Tim, kept on telling the rest of us kids and his parents that he was playing with an escaped orangutan in the cornfield. Nobody believed him. Well, me and a couple other kids decided to make a mud pit out of the lawn over by the cedar bushes. While we were playing, we saw a face in the bushes. We went to look to see what it was, and it ran away. And what we saw looked like a big dog running away. Well, we followed it because the day before we had chased down the neighbor's dog that had gotten loose. So we thought this was another dog, and we chased it. We chased it, it jumped across the creek. It was always ahead of us. We never got to see the face. We never got to see exactly what it was, but it looked like a massive dog to us. And every time we'd get a couple steps closer while we're running, it would be jumping on the other side of the creek. The moment he had lost us, and we decided to fan out. And one boy took one side of the creek, and two of us took the other side of the creek. And we walked down towards the pond. And then the youngest boy saw him run across the road over into a drainage pipe. He'd actually chased him to the drainage pipe on that side of the road. He wasn't sure what it was, and he came right over to get us two older boys. Well, he looked in the drain pipe. It looks like he could only go so far in there. We could still see his feet and his butt. One of the older boys, he got a stick and started poking Mike in the butt, and he started making dog noises, barking. So we still thought it was a dog. We didn't know what it was exactly because we could only see the butt again. We couldn't see the face. We kept on trying to get it out and poking it with a stick, and then Mike, the juvenile Sasquatch, started meowing like a cat. We were really confused. We thought there was a cat and a dog in there somehow. We didn't know what was going on. We also didn't understand that every time we poked it with a stick, Mike would grab the stick with his back feet and pull it in and pretend it was a dog biting it. It was a really weird sound that he made. It was really strange, and we were really confused about it. We decided after a couple minutes we were just going to leave him alone, and we went back to the house to tell the adults exactly what happened. When the father of the youngest boy and the other boy that was in the cornfield watching for the escaped orangutan got home, he got home to a trashed lawn that we muddied all up into a mud pit, and he wasn't too happy about that. He was yelling at us about that, and we're trying to tell him about what happened with this dog that we thought was a dog, which was Mike, and what happened in the drainage pipe and the strange sounds we heard, both barking and meowing, and he just looked at us kind of strange, and he didn't believe us either. So we're at a loss trying to tell the adults what was going on there. Well, we got yelled at for turning that part of the lawn into a rustling mud pit, and we had to buy grass seed for the repairs, and I wasn't allowed over for a couple of days. Since I couldn't see my friends for a couple of days, I played outdoors, explored. I was catching frogs and snakes, and I followed the creek. I followed the creek as far as it would go underneath the road, and when it came back to the other side and down to the pond. I even rescued a raccoon from a trap. After I saved that raccoon from that trap, I would spring every trap I found alongside the creek. So, while I was playing in the creek, I didn't think anything of it. When I glanced down the creek and saw somebody in the distance walking towards me carrying something, I just continued on building my little dam with the rocks. I figured it was the trapper, the neighbor guy that set all the traps, was picking up his traps alongside of the creek. Shortly after that is when I saw the face next to the creek and the brush. I no more than locked my eyes on that face, and the face was a butt, turning around, leaving. And what I saw, again, looked like a dog. I still wasn't putting this all together yet. So I got out of the creek. I started heading up the bank to follow the dog. As I reached the shoulder of the road, I saw this dog go into the cornfield. My neighbors from further down the road happened to be going by, and they also saw the big dog going to the cornfield. They decided it would be safer if they gave me a ride down to the neighbors. When I got there, most of the family was gone out shopping, but Tim was there, and there was a babysitter there with a baby. And the babysitter told me that Tim was out in the cornfield talking to his troll friend. The cornfield that year was right next to the house. I just walked right over there, and I found Tim sitting there in his underwear on a ball with a bunch of toys around him. Some of his sister's toys, Tonka toys, cars, baseballs, footballs, you name it. It was sitting next to him. So were most of his clothes. Tim said, "You just missed them." I said, "Missed what?" And he said, "The escaped orangutan." I said, "Sure, Tim, sure." He goes on saying he's read a few books that he's been researching orangutans in the wild, and what researchers do is limit their clothes they wear to get closer to the orangutans. And he said he was trying to get this orangutan to play with all these different toys and see which one he was interested in, just to get him out of the cornfield. He says he's been trying for days. And just then we both seen the little troll face start popping back out of the corn. Tim then started coaxing him, sweet-talking him to come out of the corn, and it was working. He was slowly coming out. He came out right next to the cornfield, and he sat on his butt with his knees to his chest and his arms around his knees. Then Tim rolled him a red kickball. It bounced a couple times before it got to him, and he hit it with his left hand. He hit it so hard it soared off into the trees. It popped, that ball. He hit it so hard. Well, Tim thought it was hilarious. And then Tim goes, look, I taught him how to say his name. I call him Mike. And the next thing I knew, it sounded like a burp, but he said the word Mike, kind of sort of like that. I guess I should have been shocked with a talking orangutan, but I was a kid and I wasn't. Well, Tim really thought he taught him how to say the word Mike, but looking back now, I'm sure he learned how to say that word from the searchers with the bullhorns looking for the boy Mike all day long, screaming out for Mike, Mike, Mike. All of a sudden, Mike makes a couple steps forward closer to Tim and grabs his arm. Tim thought it was pretty funny at first, and he was laughing until Mike tried to pull him into the cornfield. At that time, I tried to get over there as quickly as I can. I knew something wasn't right. I didn't have much luck, but I tried to release his grip. By this time, Tim was really freaking out. And then just as suddenly, Mike looks up at me and releases his grip and grabs me and gets me in a big hug, and he literally about crushed the wind out of me. Tim thought it was pretty funny. And then just like that, he lets go and he goes back into the cornfield quickly, like something called him in. So as soon as Mike went back into the cornfield, Tim stopped acting strange. He's laughing, and he doesn't usually act like that, all goofy and everything. He just all of a sudden picked up his shorts and his shirt, and he said, "Let's go into the house." So we went into the house. He showed me all the books and the encyclopedias that he's been reading on orangutans. And I told Tim, I said, "We need to tell an adult. Your parents aren't home. My dad's home. It's Labor Day weekend. We'll tell your babysitter we're going to go up to my house and talk to my dad." And that's what we did. We took off towards my house. So we're walking home along the side of the cornfield, and I look, and you can see something's moving in the corn, and Tim goes, "Look, it's Mike." And Mike jumps up, and Tim kind of waves, and I really looked like Mike was trying to wave back. And the rest of the way, Tim's trying to convince me the whole time that it's an orangutan, it's safe to be around, and that he's not going to make it up to my house because orangutans don't cross creeks, they don't like water, they don't cross that fence and this and that. Trying to convince me that's an orangutan. I wasn't so sure. Yup, he's just a big, overgrown orangutan. He's somebody's pet, is what Tim told me. So when we got to my house and we found my dad, we told him what happened. He didn't believe us. He had a good laugh. He thought we were making stuff up and we had an imaginary friend. Something like that. He didn't believe us. We're like not having any luck trying to convince the adults. It was about time for dinner, so Tim left home to go eat and I went in for dinner myself. Well, after dinner I wanted to go outside and play, and my parents were kind of concerned about the big dog thing and now a little bit concerned about the orangutan thing. I told them I'd just go down to the milking barn and I'd play on the second floor, and I would close up all the doors, all the hay bale doors, all the doors that led up to the upstairs. The only way to get upstairs was through 2 ladders, and they each had a door. So they decided that sounded safe enough, and I went down to the barns to play. So I just got done closing up the whole barn. I'm on the second floor, and I start hearing banging on one of the doors over the ladders that lead to the second floor. Thinking it was my dad, I start walking over to the door that leads to this ladder. And suddenly it breaks open, and out pops Mike. I wasn't too worried about the door. I could fix it, and I wasn't afraid of Mike. Tim had me convinced he was somebody's orangutan and there's nothing to be afraid of. So I didn't have any fear at the moment. And then he goes and walks over to the far side of the barn and plops down in one of the piles of hay. And I went over by him in another pile of hay, at about 20 feet away from him. I decided I was going to make noises, like Tim was making noises. I heard him say his name, and I started real simple with a cat, and he did a cat noise. I did a dog noise, and he did a dog noise. He barked back, but he'd go through a whole barking and growling and make every single dog noise. Same thing with the cat. Everything I did, he would do better. I whistled and he would do a whole bunch of whistles. And I even said Mike and he said Mike again. And then all of a sudden when I was looking at him, he started looking like he was melting. And this odd thing happened for a couple seconds and then it just stopped. I don't know what it was. Infrasound? Well, the next thing I knew, he came up to me and he was checking out my shirt and he started tugging at it like he was trying to take it off. And then I remembered what Tim said about the clothes, that they don't understand and they don't feel comfortable with them. So I took my shirt off. Well, he sat back down and I noticed his feet were a lot like mine. I literally put my feet on his feet. I put one at a time. I put both feet up on his feet. And then he pushed me backwards. I rolled all the way back. He pushed me so hard into the next pile of hay behind me. Yeah, I'm still thinking I'm playing with some orangutan. We had ropes hanging on each of these piles of hay. Us boys had set up with a loop to put our feet in so we could run around and jump in the hay and swing around on the things. So they stood off a little bit off the ground when you put your foot in that loop. Well, I wanted to see what he could do next, so I grabbed that rope and he watched me as I ran around that pile of hay as fast as I could, then let go, and spun around and fell on the hay and plopped on my butt. And he watched me the whole time. Well, it was Mike's turn next, and he just stood there for a second, and all of a sudden he started grabbing the rope and going upside down, feet towards the rafters. He grabs the rafters with his feet, and my exact thoughts, honest to God, back then were, oh my God, this stupid old orangutan's going to kill himself. And he grabbed those rafters and he pushed off on the rafters with a rope to gather speed to spin around that hay pile like I did on that rope, and he plopped down in the middle on his butt, even better than I did. Now this is where everything went bad. I had a Gilligan moment and I decided I was going to beat my chest after that. Well, he beat his chest after that, but His eyes turned red and he screamed like nothing I've ever heard before. At that moment, I knew it was not an orangutan, and I knew I had to get out of there. I knew I was in danger. Absolutely terrified now, I ran towards the hay bale door, which I had locked earlier, and then I felt something grab my ankle. The Mike got up on top of me and pinned me down. The door started banging. For half a second, I thought it was my dad, but it wasn't my dad. The door busted open and it was a face of what I thought was a gorilla, and I couldn't move. Mike was making a sound like a humming sound coming out of his mouth. I couldn't only move, I couldn't even make a sound. There was Mike's mom. She came right into the barn right next to me, and they ripped my pants off. They actually left a scar when they did that, pulling down on a belt on. They ripped a bunch of flesh when they pulled down my pants and ripped them off. Just then she sees my dad coming down to the barn with his Browning 16 gauge. She grabs Mike and she's about ready to leave, but Mike grabs my hand at the last second. As she jumps out, Mike still got a hold of me. I shoot out of there, but he loses his grip after a couple feet out of that door. I fell about 7 feet straight flat on my back. My dad helped me up, and when I finally got up, I could finally breathe. I finally screamed. When Mike heard me scream, he tried to get loose from his mother, and he did, and he ran back. He charged back on all fours, fast, right to us. And he gets to us. He stands straight up and he looks at me. Then he looks at my dad. He looks back at me. Mike's parents behind us stayed back by the fence. They were screaming, waving their arms. The father, the male, was a blonde Sasquatch, probably about 9 feet tall. The mother, black or dark brown. She was probably only about 7 feet tall. Then Mike beats his chest again. Then Mike grabs my arm and tries to start pulling me away, and I'm screaming for my dad to shoot. My dad shoots into the air. It scares all three of them away. One of the adults, I think the male's foot got caught on the fence and it dragged it halfway through the cornfield with it. Mike didn't go far. He stopped. Well, then Mike charged right back for us, and we went into the barn. We shut the rickety old door on the outside there and tried to get it to lock, and it wouldn't stay shut, so we went into the next room, which was the most northern room on the bottom floor. We got in the room and quickly shut the door. This door locked. I put my back against the door. To the north of us, there was that hole in the door. To the west of us, to the right, there was another small hole, and to the left of us, to the east, there was a window that was broken. For a couple seconds, it seemed like a lot longer, and we tried to figure out exactly what we were going to do next. My dad was facing me, and he could see a hole to my left and an eye peeking through it. Seconds later, a hand came through it and grabbed my arm. I couldn't break free. He tried to break the grip of Mike. He couldn't break free, so he used the butt of the gun on Mike's arm. He did that. Mike screamed in pain and let go and left it inside of the barn, and then things went quiet for a little bit. Well, after that, it was quiet for at least seemed a couple minutes. My dad went over to a hole on the east side of the building and looked out to see if it was anything going on outside. He didn't see anything. He unloaded his pockets and put his shells on the ground. He didn't have too many shells. He had a couple slugs, and the rest were bird shot. He'd become a bow hunter and only used the gun for home defense. He didn't have very many. As he looked back out the hole again, some hands came in and grabbed the barrel of his gun. He struggled with Mike for quite a while, it seemed like anyway, but he ended up firing the gun to get Mike to release the gun. After that, things again went quiet, but in the distance we could hear a siren. There was a cop car coming. Apparently, back at the house, my mother had called the police, and they're on their way. When the Michigan State Trooper got there, he saw Mike heading for that hole on the north side of the building, and he cut it off with a cop car. And that's what he told us when he came in after he asked us why I didn't have any clothes. and he asked us if that was a bear. We told him it was not a bear. We stumbled around for the words to try to tell him exactly what it was, and then again, Mike starts reaching into that hole on the east side of the building that my dad just fired the gun through as the police officer and my dad returned fire towards Mike. And then it went quiet again, and again we heard another siren coming. It was the ambulance. As we heard the ambulance approaching, we decided to go outside. Went out through the big hole with me in the middle between my dad and the cop, and as we got behind the cop car, Mike was outside. But as soon as the ambulance pulled up with the sirens on, Mike ran away. Well, the two ambulance attendants got there and they shut off the lights and the sirens to the ambulance. And we made our way over there. Mike made another appearance after just seconds. He appeared by that little white and green cooling barn, peeked around it, and then came right out in the open where everybody could see him. This time, my dad and the cop shot again. And he didn't go very far. He just went back around the cooling barn and just stared at us. By that time, the cop had figured out that he didn't like the sirens, and he went over to the ambulance and turned on the sirens on both the ambulance and the cop car. This scared Mike away for good. At least we thought, so we went back up to the house after that. We went back up to the house and we were joined by a conservation officer shortly, and the ambulance attendants checked me out further. I had superficial wounds, but I had to get stitched up and go to the hospital later. They did their best to patch me up. While that was happening, we could hear gunshots from the neighbors from a mile and a half away south of us. Several gunshots, and then the cop gets a radio call and says he has to go down to the neighbors, and he takes off. From last we left from part 2, the conservation officer and the state trooper had been called down to the neighbor's house south of us after gunshots had been fired. After a short time of being patched up by the ambulance attendants, I was about to leave with my dad and go to the hospital and get stitches. Just then the state trooper had returned from my neighbor's house and pulled in the driveway and told us that it was okay for us to go down there and talk to them. It's that time when I noticed that the state trooper's car was actually a Pontiac, one of the few brands that I actually knew from our old Pontiac wagon that we used to go camping in, that we just got rid of to get a brand new Chevy Chevette. He said that he was from the Wayland State Police Post and that this car belonged to his watch commander, and that his car, an LTD, was being repaired. That this car was special ordered by his watch commander because him and his family had worked at GM's for so long. He said that the Pontiac was painted that state police blue. It was actually his personal car that he used for service occasionally, and they had the magnetic gumball siren and everything on it to use in service. Yeah, I researched it. So the trooper took off, and my father and I went down to the neighbors to go see what happened down there and see if everybody was okay. We had to double back past my house and pick my mother back up on the way to the hospital anyway. When we got to my neighbors, the conservation officer was there, along with a couple local sheriff units that were parked in the road. And one was parked in the driveway. Most of the other kids and Tim's mom were loading up the car, but Tim wasn't anywhere around. We went to the house to go see if Tim's dad was around. We found my friend Tim's dad in the living room, and a couple cops wandering around looking at all the school supplies and blood everywhere. Tim's dad was over by the larger TV, pulling a teddy bear off the shelf. Inside that teddy bear was a beta camera. Basically, it was a homemade nanny cam. There was a cable that went from that through the wall to a VCR in the other room. He was pulling that out and trying to hook it up to the other TV to see what happened. He had just installed this camera because he suspected the babysitter was stealing money. I know that because he just suspected us kids the day before that of stealing money also. So he wanted to see if the babysitter was taking it, so he made a nanny cam. And now he was checking out to see what he got on that camera. While he was doing that, he told us when they got home, and after the babysitter left and they started to watching TV, they heard the gunshots up by our house. And then the sirens, and then some more gunshots, and then everything went quiet. And they continued watching TV until they heard something beating on the bathroom window, and then beating on the side of the house, beating on the side of the house and on the roof, and screaming. Well, the banging and screaming got louder and louder. Tim's dad went and got his gun. He just got back into the living room, and the bathroom window broke. At the time, there was a water pump house underneath this window, much like this. Well, Tim's dad then returns to the living room with his gun, a Winchester 30-30. What he finds is Tim's orangutan friend broke in through the bathroom window and was now going over to Tim. Then he grabs Tim's arm and starts to pull him towards the bathroom. All the while, the family's freaking out, and Mike's family, his parents, are outside the Sasquatch banging on the windows, screaming and making a bunch of noise too. This is all going on at the same time. And then at some point, Tim's father decided he had to shoot this crazy orangutan. Now note here the placement of the family where they were in this drawing, and some of the items were discussed by us kids in the school bus the following week when we went back to school. Even some of the items like the little professor and old school tricks, the bowl of cereal that Tim ate while he was waiting for his parents to get home, and the replacement teddy bear that Tim's dad had to buy his sister for taking the camera and sticking in our other teddy bear. So the only people who were watching this video were the two police officers there, local sheriff's units, and myself, my dad, and Tim's dad. There's no government agents there yet. At that point, he got the VCR camera beta concoction of his to work on the TV. We watched the video, and from behind I get to see Mike get shot, and he turns around and leaves on his own power. So I was thinking he might have been okay, but the amount of blood, it didn't look like he was going to be okay for very long. The shot had gone right through Mike, right through the wall and into the kitchen. It was somehow not hitting any gas pipes. He said then there was still a bunch of yelling and screaming and banging on the side of the house louder than ever after Mike had gone out to the bathroom. So Tim's dad decided to run outside of the house and shoot his gun in the air and chase the Sasquatch away, and he did. And those were the other gunshots we heard. My dad stayed and talked to Tim's dad for a while, and I decided to go out and try to find Tim. So I went outside, and Tim's mom and his two brothers and his little sister were still loading up the car, and she said that Tim was probably up by the cornfield looking for Mike. And that's where I found Tim, sitting by the cornfield, crying. I sat there with him for a bit, and I tried to convince him that Mike might still be alive. He got out of the house after all. I finally got Tim to go back to the house. Now, Tim was a good kid, but boy, when we got back to the house and my dad came out with his dad and he saw his dad, he just lit into his dad. He actually cursed his dad out for shooting Mike. He's saying that you didn't have to shoot him, he wasn't going to hurt anybody. Boy, that kid just really let his dad have it. When they argued for a bit and they had to leave, Tim, his mother, his two brothers, and his sisters were going to his aunt's. To get away from the house, his dad was staying there in case anything happened. Myself, I had to go to the hospital and get my stitches and pick up my mom along the way. Early in the morning, I get a strange phone call from Tim's dad saying, "I found your hairy friend in the creek. Come down and see him before I have to give him to the government." So I got on my bike and rode down to my neighbor's, fast. So I get to Tim's house. The older neighbor boy is there. He tells me that Tim's dad's taking the body, Mike's body, over to their house, by their barn, by the Red Arrow. And I had to go walk over there. This older boy and his father were the only people home at the house. They were out school shopping with the other neighbors further on down. Well, when I got there, they had Mike's body on a picnic table near the barn. Tim's dad and the other boy's dad were over by the picnic table by Mike's body, and Tim's dad had brought his gun. As me and the other boy approached the picnic table, there was some movement in the brush next to the barn. Out popped Mike's parents. Both of them stood up and started roaring. Tom grabbed his gun and started shooting and running after them again. By this time, me and the other boy had already run all the way up to the house. Tim's dad actually drove them away. The other boy and I could see them run away over the hills behind the houses. We kind of sat in awe. He was like, so that's a Bigfoot. We stood there and watched for a couple seconds, but we headed back over to the picnic table. His dad had peed his pants, his tracksuit, his Adidas tracksuit that he just bought. The reason I say that is like, he was really mad about it. He didn't want anybody to know about it. He said, if this ever goes down in history, make sure nobody ever knows that I peed my pants. The one boy's dad asked, well, how'd they get so close to us before we even knew? And Tim's dad says, well, look over there, all that brush all alongside of your barn there. Well, the next thing I knew, the one boy's dad was getting on his tractor, and he was going to go move all that brush. While he was moving all the brush, Tim's dad asked me to run back over to his house and get him a new shirt that he'd got all wet, getting Mike out of the creek where he'd found his body. So I ran down to the house and grabbed him a new shirt out of a package that he'd just bought. While I was getting the shirt, the other boy was getting a camera. That family was into photography and had their own dark room. He had the camera ready when I got back with the shirt. This is the picture they took. They took two pictures like this where they had Mike held up, and they took a picture of me with Tim's dad and the other boy's dad holding Mike up. This is basically a drawing of a picture. We started to get a closer look at Mike. We noticed the hands, we looked at the feet. His eyes were open, we checked those out, and then Tim's dad gently closed his eyes, and then we started looking at his teeth. We opened his jaw and started looking at his teeth first. The guys inspected the teeth. We looked. We opened the jaw a little bit, and the teeth look all blocky. They didn't look like they had incisors. They didn't look like they had small canines like we do. They're just big blocky teeth. And as we opened the jaw further, we could see that the gums were black and the tongue was black. The gums had pink spots, much like a dog sometimes do. Now, what happened next? Most of you will probably find hard to believe, or you probably don't know, but I found most Native American elders know this about their teeth. But when we opened the jaw, there was a pair of teeth in the back that came down with the jaw, retracting teeth. Honest to God, we pulled the jaw down. These teeth slid down with the jaw and slid back up with the jaw. They were located on the upper part of the jaw in the back. Well, retractable teeth or tusks aren't completely unknown to mammals. The dugong, a manatee-like creature, also has these, and I'll leave a link to more information on that below in the description. No, I'm not saying that Bigfoot or Sasquatch are a type of manatee. I'm just making the comparison because this manatee is a very old mammal, and they also share another trait that's very similar is their hearts. They both have a two-chamber heart. They're not exactly alike, but they're very similar. But I'll get to that in a little bit. And when they saw these teeth, this is what made them change their mind about everything, that they weren't going to turn in the body, that this was a dangerous animal that people had to know about. that they had to take pictures and get the word out. This is what changed it, was the teeth. Tim's dad and I noticed before we closed his eyes a red liquid that seemed to cover the iris to all the way across the eye to the white part to the pupil, kind of floating in the eye, but to me it looked more like a neon red. Now, the older boy's dad, he said that was because Mike bled out and that was blood that came to the eye while he was bleeding out, but I'm not so sure. It really looked like a different color red. Now this is a gorilla's eyes, but his were similar in color, but the iris was much larger and the white area was much less. But it was almost a golden brown in the iris. Well, then the one kid's father pulls out his hunting knife and he goes to cut Mike's chest open. Now, I've seen my dad cut open rabbits and deer and dress them, but this was different. He cut them open and his guts spilled all over the place. And the smell alone. I went over to the pole barn and puked, and they called me a baby and made fun of me, but Tim's dad, he called me back over. He says, "You gotta see this." And I'm walking over there and they're breaking open the breastplate and pulling open the ribs, and they show me the inside. When I got there, they were looking at the lungs. The lungs were huge. They almost looked like a double set of lungs. But I couldn't remember exactly what they said about those, if they were or not. By the time I got there and I started focusing on what they were doing, they really started looking at the heart. They were saying, "Oh, he's got two hearts, he's got no weight, it's a two-chamber heart." And then they found the trajectory of the bullet hole. It actually shot Mike through the lung and right through the larger part of his heart. And he survived on this other side of his heart. There were some other details, but I can't remember them all. Because just then, the government guys with the bloodhounds started pulling into Tim's house, which was down below. We were up on a little bit of a hill, so we had a little bit of an outlook. It was just one truck full of bloodhounds, but we knew the rest of the government guys were going to soon show up, and they were going to look for Mike's body that Tim's dad had found in the morning. So they had a hole dug for two of the horses that have died from PBB poisoning. And they were going to bury the horses in there for the state to come pick them up, and the hole was already dug. And what they did was they chopped off Mike's hand at the forearm. They took the rest of his body, they threw it into that hole. They threw lime on the body. They threw the two horses on top of him, and then they used the backhoe and filled it in, threw the picnic table on it. They did this in a hurry, and they sent me down as a decoy for the government guys. So I headed down there. They did that while I was going down there. They chopped off Mike's hand. They put it in this little steel or metal container that used to contain gloves, and they put it into the pole barn. When I got down to Tim's house, the first truck with the bloodhounds still had the dogs in the truck, and the cages in the back. And I was checking them out, and just then, John Redcorn pulls in behind me. And I'm driving the dogs nuts, and he comes up to me and asks me what I'm doing down there. I just told him I was checking out the dogs and that I haven't seen Tim's dad yet. And he said, "Well, I'm going up to your house anyway. Why don't you get a ride with me up to your house?" So I did. I was off with John Redcorn up to my house. Decoy successful. And John Redcorn drops me off down at the barn. And as we're down in the barn, there's a few vehicles down there, and there's some government agents down there in hazmat suits, and they're picking up hair samples, it looks like, and they're casting tracks. He leaves me with a guy that brings me into the barn where the encounter happened on the second floor. And this guy, I think his name was Kurt, he interviewed me, and I told him everything that happened. At the same time, John Redcorn was up at the house interviewing my dad, and my mother Well, she was running around taking pictures of the government agents casting tracks, which is a no-no. My sister, she was gone, I think Thursday night. She went to stay with her friends, and when this happened, it was suggested that she stay there another night, so she doesn't get involved and doesn't know. I also got to meet up at the house a couple local Native Americans from two different tribes that used to be one tribe. I can't mention the tribes. Basically, after they heard my story, they gave me a name. They gave me their Indian name of Little Chief Running Bear Naked. They thought it was pretty funny that I was running around naked after I got attacked by a Bigfoot. Later that day, my sister returned, but the government people had already gone. The rest of the holiday weekend, that Labor Day weekend, was pretty quiet until we had to go back to school. Well, the agents were nice, but they told us not to talk about it, that there'd be consequences. And then the first day of school came. Tim didn't show up. He stayed at his aunt's. He was still mad at his dad, but his two brothers and his sister showed up, and the two neighbor boys, the older boy with the camera and his little brother. We all got in the bus, and they were all talking about it. And the oldest boy, since they had a dark room and a camera, he decided he was going to bring the pictures to school. In the beginning and the end right there. So later that day, in school I got called down on the intercom to the principal's office. Walk into the principal's office, and the older neighbor boy's sitting there in the principal's office, and he's in junior high and I'm in elementary school. And John Redcorn's there. And they asked me all sorts of questions, and I don't say a thing. And the older boy says if I say anything, he's going to beat the crap out of me. I don't say a thing. They send me back to class. I go through a regular day, pretty nervous, and then I head on the school bus home. So on the bus ride home, the bus goes by the other kids' houses first. The first stop is the house that has Mike's body buried in it. And there's carpet cleaning vans there. At least 2 or 3 of them. And then the next stop is Tim's house. There's carpet cleaning vans there. The same kind of carpet cleaning vans there. And by this time the bus driver's noticing it. He says, "Boy, I wish I lived in this neighborhood. You guys partied a lot this weekend over here." So we get up to my house, and I start seeing in the distance there's carpet cleaning vans at my house. And I'm getting really scared at this point. Yeah, I didn't know this moment in my whole life was just about to be shattered. So I get off at my stop at my house and approach the carpet cleaning vans really slow. I see movement in the house. It looks like a lot of people. And I get a little bit further up by the second van, almost up to the house, and I kind of figure something's going on and I'm going to run. I started to run at that point, but just as that happened, National Guard soldiers came out of my house and tackled me and brought me into the house. John Redcorn was furious. Apparently he'd been down at the neighbors all day without getting any answers from them, and not being able to find the body after he'd saw the pictures. He immediately taped me to a chair with my dad's own duct tape. Unfortunately for me, my dad's old childhood nickname was Wires and Tape, and he had some really good duct tape, and I was stuck in that chair pretty good. They had also arranged for my sister to not be there. She was picked up by my aunt to go out and eat pizza. And that's a whole nother problem later. We'll get to that too. He had my parents escorted to different rooms, and he started screaming at me and yelling at me, "Where's the body? What do you know?" I didn't say anything. I just sat there taped up in my chair. This went on for a few minutes, but then he said, "I'm not a cop, you just can't play this game with me," and then he walked out. While he was gone, 3 of the guards noticed my Kiss Alive 1 record album that I had sitting by the stereo out from the night before, and they were asking me about it, and they told me they'd just been to the concert. They asked me if I was a Kiss fan. I told them, yeah, that was my first Kiss album that I had bought. He immediately returned with a black briefcase He set it down on the dining room table next to me. It still taped up in the chair. He opened it up, and inside that thing was a bunch of vials of I don't know what at the second, and needles. What was I getting into? Well, little did I know was in that briefcase was sodium pentothal, truth serum. Well, we kind of underestimated John Redcorn here a little bit, and later I'm about to find out to the extent of his skills and his experience. But that's a little bit later. So he was really going to do this. He was going to administer this truth serum, and I really started freaking out. He was getting the needle ready and then getting it ready to put in my arm. I started crying, I was screaming, and then something really weird happened. Those 3 guards that were Kiss fans, they drew their weapons on John Redcorn and told him to stop. As much as I appreciated that it didn't work, John drew his gun. And there was more bad guys than there was good guys. There was more National Guard members there that were loyal to John. And they drew their weapons, and it was a standoff for a couple of minutes. And the Kiss Army had to put down their weapons, and they got hauled off. And they told me to fight. I tried to fight. There wasn't much I could do. The next thing I knew, the needle was in my arm. I didn't feel anything at first. I think he waited a while. He was waiting for the drug to settle in. He started questioning me again. I still wouldn't talk. But he wasn't playing games. Yeah, he got a couple of his guards over. He said, we're taking him down to the neighbors. They left my feet and my hands taped up, grabbed me by my shoulders, threw me in one of the vans, and drove me down to the neighbors. We got to the neighbors in the van. We pulled right up to the barn. There's more National Guard members there. They had their guns out, and at gunpoint they had Tim's dad, the neighbor boy, and his dad. Nobody else seemed to be around. They dragged me out in front of them, plopped me on the ground, and he started questioning me again. Where's the body? I still didn't talk. It's about this time, Tim's dad noticed I was stumbling, I was slurring. He got furious and he took a couple steps forward and he said, "Did you drug him? Did you drug him?" But 2 guard members stopped him at gunpoint. And then I was subjected to some more questioning, and I still didn't say a thing, but I looked up. I looked up at Tim's dad, but behind Tim's dad was where Mike was buried, and there was an upside down picnic table with fresh dirt. And John Redcorn finally noticed that. They've been there all day, and then he finally noticed that, and he gets on the radio, "I found some fresh dirt, get the tractor." So now they'd found the body. The other boy, the neighbor boy, was screaming at me, calling me a rat, telling me he was going to kick my ass, and his dad was screaming at me. I could barely even stay conscious, and the next thing I knew, they were digging up the body. They'd found the hand, and they took me in the van back to my house, where they waited for another vehicle to take me in to get hypnotized. To take me in to get hypnotized to forget it. When they got me back to the house, they finally decided to take the tape off my feet and my hands. They sat me over in the corner. Probably looked like a drooling idiot, and they figured that they could just say anything they want in front of me now. It wouldn't matter. I was drugged up and I was about to get hypnotized to forget everything. So they sat down at the table there at the dining room and they talked to one another. And I heard everything. Redcorn hauled out a bunch of files out of a briefcase, one at a time, that he was going through, and he was sharing all these other cases with these other 2 tribal elders that were there. One of the first things he starts talking about, he pulls out the file on Mike. Mike's file was called Specimen Number 5. And he pulled out the file, and it was mislabeled. It was mislabeled to Species 5. He erased it. He was trying to make there a correction, and he said, I'm going to leave it like that and see if there's any leaks. I don't exactly know what he meant about that, but that's one of the things he said. He went on to say that none of the other bodies that they had previously were complete. That one, they found pieces rotten in the woods. Another one were pieces from a farmer that had tilled a field and found pieces in his tractor afterwards and things of that sort. They didn't have a whole body. One of the guys looked over at me and said to John Redcorn, is he going to remember this? And he said, no. He's a drugged up 10-year-old that's about to get his memory erased. He's not going to remember a thing. Sure, I'm not. After that, he started talking about the gun clubs, that he was going to organize the Caledonia Sportsman Club, the gun club, and open that up within a year. And he went on talking about the other encounter near Gull Lake. I think it was a year or two before mine, and must have been about 75 or 76. And he said he opened up a gun club down there to drive out the Sasquatch. He organized what was down there was a gun club and a rod and reel club in Kalamazoo, and he organized it and got them a shooting range there in Kalamazoo. I can't remember the details of the other case he talked about down near Gull Lake. He did talk about an abduction of some sort of a child, and he thought they were related to my case. I remembered enough of that case to find the place, strictly on what he told me about what he designed on the logos, where the place was, and his description of it. I also found another BFRO case that's also related to that exact case. I'll put a link in that in the description below. Pretty soon my ride was here. Some military limousine, I guess that's all I could get, to take me into Grand Rapids over at the Kent County Juvenile Detention Center on Ball Street, this building here. This is where my memory would be erased. They didn't think I'd remember where I was at either, but they took me right back to my old neighborhood in Grand Rapids. I knew exactly where I was. And sometime later, after John Redcorn had gathered more evidence, he came back. My mother had gathered newspaper articles. My mother had a VCR tape of the news footage from Channel 13, ZZM News. And she took those pictures of the government guys casting and gathering evidence. Well, they busted her for that, and I had to watch her get taken away too. And they eventually took away a number of the kids and the mothers, all to cover this up. And there was a lot of feuding going on between all the families and all sorts of problems. And when my mother came back, she wasn't the same person. She wasn't, she was pretty abusive to begin with. She was 10 times worse when she came back. They didn't take my sister or any of the other girls, just the mothers and us boys. They didn't take the fathers and just held something over their head and told them not to ever talk, or whatever that something was that they dropping on them. That was enough to keep them quiet, and everybody else forgot about it, because they're hypnotized to forget about it. 2014, I remember. Well, Tim, though, he lasted the longest. I'm not sure how long. He was over at his aunt's still when this was happening, because he was still mad at his dad. Then they tried to hide him for a while, because they took the other kids. They took me first, and they took the other kids, and they tried to hide him. My aunt, that was taking my sister out for pizza and keeping her out of the house while this was going on, she tried to hide. She went all over the country. I don't know if they found her or not. I never seen her since. I believe they even went after Mike K. And I think his father and a couple other families tried to get an attorney together, and my father opted out of it and ruined the whole thing. After some time, a little red 77 Jeep Comanche pickup truck showed up, and two local guys from the local tribes showed up, and they started taking me out doing stuff. The first thing they did was take me somewhere over in Middleville State Game area where the encounter happened, and they had a tin with them that was supposedly from Mike's hand, the ashes. We did a ceremony, and we spread Mike's ashes out there. After that, they started stopping by even more frequently, telling me about how their tribe used to be one and how they broke up, teaching me about their ways, teaching me how they hunt, teaching how they track. And at one time, they took me on a really long trip to go see a whole bunch of different tribes all over the state, mostly in the north. We ended up going all the way up to the UP, and in that little red pickup truck with a bent seat, and it was a stick shift, and I had to sit in the middle. It's a long drive up there. One of the first stops in the UP was an Indian burial ground right across the bridge by a big church there, and from there we went further north up by Munising, and we met with some more tribes up there, and they introduced me to the elders up there, like they did all the other tribes that I met, and they told about what happened. And on the way back, we stopped in quite a few different places, but this place we had a really good encounter at was at Steuben Lake. Those guys could do some really good Bigfoot calls, and this was even during the day. And we kind of got surrounded, and one actually came out right in front of me, and he looked like he was going to grab me. And one of the guys had a gun. I think it was a small 357. He had to shoot in the air to scare it away. It was it was kind of a terrifying encounter, but you know, I've been there before. This actually went on for a few years up until I was in 8th grade and junior high was the last time I saw them. Well, up until recently when I found them a couple of years ago. But they told me things like, Randy, you were playing with a caveman. It was a Neanderthal. This was the first body, full body that they had. They found out that the old skeletons, they weren't built right. That I think it was the second vertebrae and the neck, or maybe two vertebrae, but it had something to do with the number 2 in a vertebrae, and the neck wasn't supposed to be there, and the skull actually sat lower. They found that out, and they said all the big skeletons will disappear and everybody forget about it in 40 years. And they're well aware of you know, Bigfoot, Sasquatch ability to hypnotize. They said that's why Tim was acting so strange, and that's why, you know, they can get you to get your clothes off so easily. And also they talked about cloaking, and since they talked about it, I figured that the government probably must know about all that. Yeah, it's a big conspiracy thing, I know, but like, why are they doing all the Neanderthal testing? Then where did all those big skeletons go to that were in all the museums that they dug up, and then that President Lincoln talked about? Where'd they go? I'll have much more details in the book that I'm trying to put together for Art Prize. Hopefully I'll get it done before September. Evidence. Well, since I started this in 2014, a couple of the witnesses have already passed, including my father. But every witness you'd see, police officers, ambulance attendants, every government agent, I found them, I tracked them down, I got their names. I even tracked down all the cars and which ones are still around, like the ambulance is still around. I spent years in archives looking through old newspapers and microfiche I found a lot of evidence of missing evidence, of pieces of microfiche missing, of exactly where I'm looking for, where it's supposed to be in that exact spot, and the same thing with the newspapers. So I didn't have much luck in those. I did find some finds, and I found some other things that I turned over to my attorney. The art for Morse Lake Monsters alone took me 2 years so far, and I'm still working on one painting, so I guess it's still not done yet. But this is the Bigfoot wall room. This is the gear: camouflage, some night vision cameras, some thermals, some trail cams, a whole bunch of different stuff. I also spent years in several national forests, from Michigan all the way down to Florida and everything in between. All the maps on the wall keep track of all the encounters and where we've been. And yeah, that masked Bigfoot was an American Bigfoot by Bobcat Goldthwait. I'll put a link in the description. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.